The title is on historicism, historicism through music and cultural referencing. And we have a range of 4 very different practitioners here. And I'm just so the format that I'm gonna take is that I'm gonna introduce them one by one actually. And then we're gonna be discussing a little bit about the individual works first. And I'll also be showing you some material as a reference point. And then after that, once we're done with everyone, then we can talk about more general issues that concern everybody. So I'm gonna introduce first of all Sun, Amazon Sun over there. So Amazon Sun, he was born in Thailand, but he moved to Norway when he was 3 years old. He graduated from Oslo National Academy of the Arts in 2011 with a degree in modern and contemporary dance. In recent years, he has been actively practicing vogue, which is a highly stylized dance originating in the late 1980s that evolved out of the Harlem ballroom scene. So since 2012, he's been living in Thailand, and he's been interested in studying vogue scenes and building a ball culture in Asia. He started the vogue scene in Thailand and is the first gay person from Thailand to join balls around Asia. Balls meaning ballrooms, I suppose. He also belongs to the House of Amazon, headed by the mother, Leomi Maldonado. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a bit of a video that introduces him and his work.
With voguing as a platform, you can really show people the meaning of life. With voguing, I can create my own concept of family and love. Everyone calls me Sa. I do performance art. Voguing is people expressing freedom of being ourselves, of LGBTQ, of gender fluidity. It started in the underground in Bronx, in New York, where LGBTQ people would gather together. They could be able to express themselves, and they would use poses to fight each other. They would vogue each other out on the dance floor.
Work this pussy, work this pussy, work this pussy. 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 Work this pussy.
That's what I love about vogue scene, because it shows the humankind. It shows all the different identities that we have in this world. I would take vogue classes in New York, Taiwan, Japan, and it just went on and on. I was the first one to ever bring voguing as a ballroom culture back here to Bangkok. When people go to church or Buddhists go to temples, so voguing for me that's like that. It's like a meditation somehow. It's getting bigger and bigger into more Asian countries, and now you have it in Korea, you have it in Hong Kong, China, Thailand, Singapore is starting slowly to get one, Malaysia. A lot of these LGBTQ kids, they get kicked out from their biological parents, family, and voguers, we create our own family, which we call house. It's a space for people to show their true identity. In my classes, there's all kinds of people, but mainly it's non-dancers taking my classes, and I think they just can feel really related to what I'm trying to share. I will teach you how to vogue, but yourself has to be the one to answer yourself, why do you vogue?
is that you have this art form or this dance form originating from Harlem in the States, and then it's channeled through yourself, and then you are also helping to bring it around the world, I guess around Southeast Asia first, or Thailand, the region. And so I'm just wondering whether you could start by talking a bit about what for you what's important about this form of this art form for you. What do you get from this art form that has inspired you? And then how do you want to, how are you then bringing this out to other people in other cultures?
Hey, hi everyone. Any Thai people here? So I think what caught me, why I got so interested in voguing is all the genders that I can see through the different categories that they do in the balls. So it's not only dancing, they do runway, they do face category, they do sex sirens, which some of you saw yesterday. They do realness, they do best body. So there's a lot of categories where they perform with their own mind, their body, their souls. And I just see a lot of diversity of how we, human as one person, individually can perform in many different ways. I guess similar to like actors, how they have to learn to portray different characters, energy, souls, mind, and I feel it's the same with a lot of voguers. But for them, it was like a really real deal. Like they had to do it because that was how they could survive in a society where the next day you might be killed for being a trans or gay person or so. So I was really interested in all these gender performances that you could really see in the balls, whether it was femininity or masculinity or even like genders. Sometimes I can't even explain myself because there's just so many levels of femininity. There's so many types. The same with masculinity, and also you can blend them. You can play with them almost like they meet alike. You can go from like super feminine to suddenly masculine. So there's this category. It's called realness with a twist. So basically, the butch queens, the gay men, they come out acting like a straight man. Then suddenly they have to do vogue femme, which is super feminine. So for me, that was something very interesting too. That button in your mind, like how you suddenly change your state, like suddenly like that. So like all these gender performances was really like interesting for me and just got me very excited. And I really wanted to find a way to practice that myself, or even see how could I be able to even use that in my daily life. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we talk about voguing as well, I'm just wondering whether there are different cultural experiences of voguing itself, or whether voguing itself has adapted to different cultures when it travels around the region or around the world.
Yeah, I would say it do get adapted. Like let's say category sex sirens. So in New York, they barely do anything with their body. They just come to the judges and show they have a sexy body, a sexy energy, sexy look, sexy eyes, boobs, butt, whatever they feel is sexy with themselves. And when the category sex sirens came to Asia, it's much more performative actually. So people are like dancing more or doing more like sex sirens, like they say like it's the Asian way. So it become more movement to portray your sex appeal. So for sure, when it has come to Asia, also because we have dress codes to all the different categories that you have to follow for each balls, there will be different dress codes. So of course in Asia, they will use their own Asian cultural clothes or so for sure. I think that your own Asian culture that you are grown up with. The Asian voguers, they will use that or even with me, when I do Owe Vogue, sometimes I put in like koan poses.
What poses?
Koan from koan dance, Thai classical dance. Because Owe was also influenced by Asian martial arts. So because of that concept, I was like, okay, let me try if I can put in, I don't know, like Muay Thai poses. So in Japan, like I know this voguer, she will put in like sumo into the old way, and some Chinese they will put in like Chinese dance, or yeah. So yes, it does change where it goes.
Yeah, because I see this tension maybe. It's like between maybe what is more like a globalizing force, something. So, and we talked about this briefly earlier on when I talked about how in a way LGBTQ culture, because there's this tendency for states or nation states to suppress LGBTQ culture within the nation state, right? So when you talk about a kind of a more LGBTQ culture, it seems to try to reach out for alliances across borders. So I was just wondering about the tension between where you want to have something that's maybe more universal in a sense, but also when there are still these kinds of cultural influences or cultural roots that individuals have.
Yeah, so I think because we live in 2019 now, and especially for me who lives in Thailand, where LGBTQ is not really that oppressed, I would say. Like it's quite open in public, people do accept it in public. It's just still a lot of stereotypes, what is LGBTQ, that's all. And we still don't have a lot of like equal rights. But it's, like the trans in Thailand, they don't really need to be afraid of like the next day, am I gonna get killed or not? So they don't have the same thing like in New York. I would say there's much more struggles in New York. So I feel also like when Vogue came to Asia, it also showed that the women are more oppressed as the LGBTQ. Because in Asia, there's a lot of girls joining the Vogue culture. So it's no longer only an LGBTQ culture anymore. It's also a lot of female comes to join the Vogue also, and even leading the Vogue culture. Like in the Manila in the Philippines, there's actually a girl who growing up the Vogue scene and the ball scene in Manila.
So I guess something that's very inclusive that can accept people from the non-LGBTQ community as well, right?
Yeah, like I feel for now it's more about like what people are going through, and we're sharing the same idea of like freedom, equality, no matter what it is about. Like, yeah.
Thank you so much, Sun. Okay, I'd like to move on now to the next artist, Nada El-Shazli, over here. So let me just introduce her. So she started out singing Misfits covers in a local punk band, but since then she's been making a name for herself in Cairo's underground scene by producing her own electronic tracks. Her debut album, Awa, from 2017, was released by Nawa Recordings. It's a label that focuses on Middle Eastern artists. Awa was produced together with Maurice Luca and Sam Shalaby. Sam Shalaby, some of you may know him also from the Doors of East Aguza. And the album takes its name from the Arabic word for marshlands. Okay, so what's interesting for me is that I wanted to let you hear a bit of the kind of I guess Arabic influences from Nada's music. So let me just play you this first. Sorry, but in the interest of time, let me just move on. Now, the other thing that was nice is that Nada also was featured in kind of a feature on Cairo's New Wave So maybe I can pass this around. There's a post-it mark where the article is. So it covers the Cairo underground scene. It's a wonderful article. I mean, it also introduced me a lot to the artists who are involved, in that scene. And I think what Nada did was she actually referenced in a previous issue, in the Wire anyway, she talked about some of the musicians that influenced her. So I'm going to play you this Munira El Mahdia, just for a sense of what she sounds like. Wanted to ask Nada, really, so I don't feel equipped really to be talking about the Egypt scene or the Cairo scene, and I think that this is a scene that's perhaps rather foreign to many of us here. I just was wondering whether you could talk about the scene there. Tell us also a bit about what's been happening in recent years with the underground Cairo scene.
Where do I start? There's a lot of music being made in Cairo today, and it's really vast, the different directions. So there's a huge rap and hip-hop scene and trap scene. There's also a really big dance music scene, and everything in between and everything around. And lots of the music that is being made is mostly released on the internet because venues are a bit of a challenge, opening and closing all the time, depending on who is, sometimes depending on who's in power, but also depending on the money or whatever. Like the same challenges that exist everywhere in other places in the world.
Well, in the article, I think I read a lot about censorship, like overt political censorship of music. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Okay. Egypt is around 120 million people, and I think that's the number that they are telling us, but I'm sure it's a lot more. And you have 50% of the economy working in informal economy, so they're not even counted within the government. As a result, there's hundreds of different parallel universes, right? And Cairo is a city that really never sleeps. You can buy furniture at 4 a.m. in the morning. And because you're just like, everyone is taking different shifts, right? And for that reason, sometimes you can exist in one of those parallel worlds and you think that this is Cairo or whatever. And also the lack of involvement of everyone in the political situation, it just makes whatever governmental institutions really far from whatever is happening on the ground, so they can still be using, pen and paper to document like whatever bureaucratic stuff, and have some laws that exist, from the 30s and stuff. It's super heavy and it's super far away. So it also depends on who is the officer at the moment in terms of censorship. It's just all very open and very open to different interpretations depending on the time. I never bothered to go and tell them, hi, I'm Nada, I make music, here's my lyrics, please give me some copyrights or please protect me. I've never bothered. So it's just more about this like parallel life within parallel life.
So what we're seeing is that, there are multiple cultures happening within one big city, right? And also this immigrant influx as well, that's changing the kinds of discourses or the kinds of cultures that are developing in Cairo. Is that what I'm getting?
Not really. It's mostly 90% Sunnah Muslim. Also Egypt is very centralized, so there's Cairo and Greater Cairo, and there's not a lot of things happening in different cities. So most of the time it's just one narrative.
Okay. No, what I found.
It's a pretty complex thing to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the first tracks on your album I wanted to play just to get a sense of the way you're using what I interpret at least as more traditional Arabic melodies or vocal techniques, but you changed it in a way.
It was a cool effect. That's me.
Well, okay, so also from the track, right, so I wanted to quote one of the very interesting, so that track is called, the translation is I Lose Memory.
Yeah.
And I wanted to quote from there because I thought it was a very meaningful lyric. It says, I lose memory, I live the future and walk beneath it, to drown in the saliva of the lunatics. Can you talk a bit about the way they use memory and also the kinds of traditional musics in your work and how what you're trying to bring, where you're trying to bring it?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first.
Yeah.
Traditional. I don't think it's traditional in that sense because this is how people sing today in pop music in Cairo. It's not really something that is frozen somewhere in a, like it's not locked in a museum or something, and it's not even also folklore. Or, I'm not doing this is just me singing whatever I grew up with. You know what I mean? I did draw influence from music from the 1890s and 1920s because I think it was a very interesting time. Especially about how the voice and the musicians playing together, it was a lot more open and it depended so much on improvisation. And I really liked that because it resulted with a lot more openness and freedom in playing and singing and imagining what could be possible, to do with an instrument or a voice or an effect or whatever. It's a lot more open. The first question, memory, because there's a lot of accumulated things and thoughts and stuff that were very present with me when I was first writing this album. It is my first album, and I was always making music, but never thought I'll do it professionally or something like that. I would make an album or something like that. So one of those very persistent thoughts was this feeling of being completely not outside of yourself, that you're not identifying with any of your thoughts, and just completely being able to. You're just not relating to yourself at all, so it doesn't really matter, like whatever memory that you have, it's just not coherent. So this image, drowning in the saliva of the lunatics, is coming from there. Is when none of that can come to a coherent piece, and it's just an image that I was hoping to strongly put that in motion without having to explain, actually.
When you talk about memory, does memory kind of, does it anchor you or does it drag you down? You know what I mean? For you, how do you deal with memory in your work?
I think it's great because you always see and you always read things differently.
Yeah.
Maybe time, so
maybe I can
it's
also
like a movie or it's like a fantasy movie.
Maybe I can also make a reference to this image that the album cover of your first album. Can you talk a bit about what's going on in this design? Sorry?
But there is a slipper.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell me what you
No, it's very difficult for me, I guess. Well, this is one of the things also I hope to discuss later with everyone as well, but I guess when we talk about global reception of regional cultures, I mean, that's what we can term it. It's so difficult because there's a lot of misunderstandings as well. There's a lot of, we want to learn more, but we also oftentimes interpret in our own ways. And we always wonder, are we getting it right? Are we misinterpreting as well? And I think that's also one of the issues maybe you can discuss later with also like Western consumption of Southeast Asian cultures. I think there's a lot of, or even Southern cultures, right? Cultures in the South, where there's a lot of speaking for the global South, so speaking for the regions. Yeah, so I'm not sure really, I mean, in terms of like, wow, I don't even know where to start really with this.
It's just a painting. It's not, I mean, it's not meant to be read in a specific way.
Right.
I don't know, for me it always was this like changing shape, because I very much relate to the slippers between the mountain and the lioness. I think also it spoke to me because from like old pharaonic arts too, like the idea of animals and humans merging together, creating like a creature where you can then just take them and have them move through fire and travel different places, and this idea of also this transformation. So yeah, it spoke to me because of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For our next performer, we're going to talk to Kas. I'm going to introduce Kas first. So you may remember Kas from last night. So Kas played last night twice actually. He played with Gabriel Modus Operandi, and then he did a DJ set at about 1:30 a.m. So Kasimin, is that how I pronounce it? Kasimin was originally from a ghetto in North Jakarta, now a resident in southern Bali. So Kas has been cited by Fact magazine as a mayhem of anti-aesthetic fun. He has been featured in Boiler Room's Pure Rave article and contributed a mix for them. Okay, so Kas rejects the idea of fixed genres. He's always hungry for music that gets the body grooving. He's also invested in researching traditional Indonesian music, tracing its strain within Southeast Asia and incorporating it with contemporary dance music. Let me play some. Well, okay, so first thing I want to play actually is, if you look at the Gabriel Modus Operandi Instagram site, it's a fascinating kind of repository even, right, of, I guess, Indonesian oddities, odd cultures. There are things like this. There are things like that. Really weird scenes of, I don't know, mass hysteria or something, or possessions, or I can't really tell. I'm going to ask you later about it. So if you look at the Gabriel Modus Operandi videos, you can see again these references to indigenous practices, kind of rituals taking place in the local communities. And so, well, one more last video is this thing here, where Boiler Room did a kind of an introduction to Gabriel Modus Operandi. And what I really like is that, well, if you look at the video editing, you can see what I mean. the video you can see that actually his partner Ishan actually, in many ways the poses and the movements very much take after or get influence from those kinds of indigenous cultures that we're seeing in some of the YouTube videos that they've made. I just want to ask Kas, basically, first question is, what is happening in some of the, on your what you call that, Instagram feed? What are these things that you have collected and why?
Actually, this is like the account that we did together.
Yeah.
So basically, like we start everything with a joke. Like we have jokes and we hate things together. Like mutually hate things together. Like when we kind of like I grew up in Sumatra, like really close to really close in Riau, and Ichan also from Sumatra, and I happened to be in Jakarta, and later on we moved in Bali, so we kind of like know like these three different perspectives of the scene of the joke, and this is actually when we kind of like are really bored with the jokes of like a common joke. Like you start to have these jokes that like it's not funny anymore. It's not really relate to us. And then thanks God that the 4G come to Indonesia, and people start to make content like amazingly. Like you have like 600 language back then, and you have like too many people and too many jokes. So we kind of created all the thing that actually have a line that it's just in ghetto level improvisation. This is like the idea of like simple things like racing. Like we have a lot of racing things, not because we are street racer, but we're really amazed with how they do that things. Because sometimes it's over decorating, this thing is, and the cost to make that thing is actually you can buy 500cc, but they're still using this cheap scooter. But something interesting when we check in, and things getting details and details. If you see, there is a couple of videos. There is this scooter that got carved, and to the point that it looks like keris for us. It's like maybe they just love to carving things,
So there's a lot of this kind of like modifications of like their bicycle, their motorbikes, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of like rev it up. And what is and you're saying this is quite huge, right? This is quite a popular thing, is that right?
Yeah, it's funny because it suddenly like it appears like in like there's tons of Instagram account, and this is like not only just bike. Like we have like really big metal scenes in Indonesia. We have a really big metal scene, and if you check in the video Dosa Besar, there is no cultural references in there. It's just the practicing. Like we created that there's no one wearing any traditional things. But one video that really stuck us so much when there is one guy doing that kind of trance ritual, and he got like a D side, the black metal t-shirt. So he's using D side, and then the other one using Rapsol t-shirt. And this is the kids just hang out together, doing like trance together in the backyard or some people like that. But no cultural, no what do you call it, like accessories that define you like, oh, this is batik. No, they don't do that. They like really live in the present.
Yeah.
They listen to metals, they do street racing, and we try to kind of connecting it.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing because it's the same time that the club music sucks. Like it sucks so hard. Like I don't know in Singapore, but in Indonesia it's become really exclusive space. Like in Indonesia, the club culture is come from the people that have a privilege to study abroad and coming and then bring this culture. But after like 15 years, 20 years, it doesn't really go beyond there. It's just this wannabe to like, oh, we want to be like Berlin. We want to be like, try to copy everything.
Yeah.
So, and we found out that a lot of dangdut show is better than that show because people are really losing themselves, And I think like I thought club's supposed to be this kind of place, but the club is full of, like they like try to be pretty, not really dancing, just want to checking out people. So we always like randomly go to like some dangdut show or some metal show, and we found out that this is the spirit that really tell us about something about Indo, I think particularly. Not like as a nation, it's just like as a, well, sometimes it's funny but it's so dark and it's so ugly and it's so chaotic in the same way, you know. So yeah, and I think that's the reason why we make the Instagram.
Yeah.
Because also when we talk about it, we're actually jealous of them, all these kids, because they have these guts to just fuck it. You know?
Yeah.
It's amazing to cut the references of something. Like I'm DJing for like 8 years. If I play like music like house, I pull out all the references. Oh, I want to sound like Chicago. This generation, this kid doesn't give a shit. They have their own shit, and that's really nice for me.
Yeah, they kind of grab from everywhere because they're living in, they are actually submerged or immersed in all these different cultures, right? The metal, also the local trance rituals.
That's one of like, okay, this is one of the chaotic things. There is some small comic book called Sunarto. It's actually Naruto mix, because of there's a culture of Islamic boarding school. There is Islam. This is like between Islamic boarding school start to make their own comic called Sunarto, which is ninja santri Muslim. So like, it changed the narrative of Naruto. It's like lo-fi Naruto, and everything. It's just like Naruto but Islam. It's just like and this is exactly because at the same time also you have this. If you see the news, Indonesia have a lot of like somehow looks like having like a lot of ultra progressive like right side, like become like we are a Muslim country, and at the same time if you see in the forum like this kind of like Facebook politics, you know, and then there is a hentai forum, the same people doing like this is the same people. So like that's what we love so much. Like you cannot Indonesian that believe something from Middle East but got horny about something from Japan, and this is the generation, and it's amazing.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So the kind of cultural appropriations or referencing also, I mean, it can be utilized by, I mean, different politics, right? Whether it's the progressive left or whether it's on the right. I wanted to also ask you actually about Gabba itself. So what about you? What about Gabba attracts you? Gabba had its own heyday, I suppose, in the 90s. Funny thing enough is that it's coming back in popularity these days. But it also started out as a very Amsterdam, European kind of thing. How did that, do you remember when you were first exposed to it in Indonesia?
There is no. Basically our genre is not Gabber, it's imaginary Gabber.
Yeah.
That's what we think. If we have Gabber, maybe it sounds like this, but it never happened. So we make one. So and the Gabber itself, the name, it's actually when you do the bike, like what do you call it? It's Geber in Indonesia. So our real group name
It's Geber.
No, it's Pukimax. I shouldn't say this. It's really bad. But our manager said no. It's 2019. There is a lot of female power. That sounds really ugly because it's your mom. And he can straight away come. Gabber modus operandi, and okay, and actually it's between like there's a movement in Jogja about like collective of artists.
Yeah, it's a first new media artist in the 90s called Gabber modus operandi. I mean, just make a joke about that.
Right.
But it's basic. This is all joke. You know, it's just getting big. So.
Well, just to touch on that point you made. So, what about the in this sort of cultures? I guess what's the role of women actually? Women in whether the contemporary culture, or whether you're talking about also some of the things that are happening in the ghettos that you talk about. Because I mean, you're talking about motorbikes. Is it a very masculine?
It's getting amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of like a drag racing with hijab girls.
Yeah.
Which is like for me, that's really progressive. And somehow things back to like the 80s when they have like DIY erotica calendar. They start to making it again, but like it's pretty chaotic in this kind of culture. Like especially like I think it's just like in between this Chinese cheap phone, they have the access to have a smartphone, and then the internet, and then they I think most of them love to communicate, but they don't know that they're actually making content for us specifically. So it started to become like really interesting ghetto improvisation, and the position of woman. I think this is like really gray area because somehow it sounds like really low, somehow it sounds really high. Like it depends on which area. Like it's too many areas to pointing out. But like
What about your own scenes? People that come for government or primary shows, or people in the Yes No Wave kind of Yes No Club kind of scenes.
like what do you mean
In terms of the culture, how are women involved, and
I don't know. I don't really know, but like last three shows that I know, the show gonna be fun if there's like usually after 2 songs there's a woman screaming, and then okay, it's gonna be like a good show today. We don't know that women, but like somehow like in terms of music also we always talk like there's we're referencing also a lot of this rongeng things. Rongeng is like basically like
Session. Dancer with the session.
dancer with the possession. This is like a really sexual. Like they even have the you call it scarf to put the guy coming to the floor. There's Ichan doing a couple of moves also.
right?
And in Bali, we have this thing called calon arang, when a girl mostly, it's a girl possessed by it and start to want to stab the body with a kris. So the women position in Indonesia, I think it's really getting better. Like, yeah, a lot of metals band.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Kas. I want to move on to our fourth speaker for today. So Joseph on the far end there, he's a Singapore-based educator and independent historian who used to co-run the independent record store Fluxus, which hosted in-store gigs featuring both international and Singapore artists. So after the short folder, he's done more writing in recent years. He's contributed to various local and overseas publications. He's also written articles at spores.com on the Singaporean underground and experimental music scene. And he blogs semi-regularly at psychmetalfreak.blogspot.com. So I brought a book where he contributes an article about noise music. I don't know, after the round, if you want to take a look. And also I wanted to just show you his blog post, blog page, his blog, right? Okay. So he talks a bit about some of the conferences he's been presenting at as well. He also does reviews of gigs sometimes. Recently, Joseph and a few others who were involved in a rather seminal kind of a space in Singapore in the mid-2000s, very short lived, just about 2 years. But there were a lot, it's a place where Joseph and Harold Xia actually has up a kind of a shop, but also a performing space for experimental music. So it's a place where I think created this physical space where people could go meet, talk about the music that they love, and also occasionally some performances as well. Okay. So for Joseph, really, one of the things I wanted to ask you is that recently, actually, you wrote about presenting at 2 conferences. I wanted to ask you about the second conference in Japan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the title was towards alternative cultural studies, and you actually talked a bit about local music cultures, presenting their works in a particularly different way as opposed to perhaps in the Western world, right? So can you talk a bit about what you're doing, what you're writing about there?
Okay, I think two things basically motivated me to write that. Firstly, I think it's also how the internet, the virtual space has shaped narratives about music, culture, generally, especially for the past 10 years. Okay, we are in Internet 2.0. I hope this is the term that is still in currency. I think in the past, when we talk about music and culture in so-called non-European, American, Anglo-American setting, it's a lot about a bit of the 19th century anthropologist exoticizing way of looking at things. We are like specimens to be examined, to be looked at, to be reported. And then in some ways, there's also this talk about appropriation. It goes back all the way to the 19th century with a lot of expos back in Europe and the North, developed North. So a lot of people like Picasso and all these people, they actually took a lot of ideas from the South. So I think with the internet, I think it is pretty empowering. I use Ujikaji, Mark's label, as a case study, as well as Senyawa and Hasana Edition, cassette only label as a case study. That it is a very different situation now. It's about knowingly understanding that there's a certain gaze, or there's a possibility of certain gaze coming from Europe or America. But there's also this thing that we know that there's this gaze, but we want to leverage on that gaze so that we are able to position ourselves better in the global experimental cultural economy. Okay, so there's a certain shift. Because it's no longer about, okay, we are doing our own things, and then suddenly all these people coming in and looking at, oh, that's interesting, that's cool, blah, blah, and go back and report about it, and that's it. But I think now there's a lot of two-way thing. I think what our friends from Indonesia have been doing, I think it's great, because it's about understanding about that it's not a one-way traffic, it's a two-way traffic. And I think we are not able, so far not able of talking about that, in that sense. And cultural studies should be a field to look more into that. But the problem is that cultural studies, as you know, is dominated by certain countries, okay? The British, the Americans, and the Japanese. So that's the reason why it actually motivated me to want to write a paper based on people whom I know, like Mark, and also artists whom I admire, like Senyawa, to actually position a way that we should actually look at it this way. So actually it goes back to my idea about historicizing. If you look at today's theme, okay, what is historicizing? Okay, so does historicizing means that we are only looking at it 50 years down the line, look back, and then we write a history book about it? No, I think it's about, okay, what I call, it's called DIY history. Okay, what do I mean DIY history? We write history as it's happening. Why is it so important? Because we have the platform to do that. And what we should do is we should archive, we should actually be journalistic about it, we should record, and then we are able to have a rich and big pool of information and resource that we can position ourselves better in subsequent years when we want to look back and write about our culture, our music. Because if we don't do that, a lot of times they're going to get lost. And the problem is, if people will come in to write something about Southeast Asian music and culture, we might fall into the old trap of people exercising us again because they are not involved. The thing is, if we are the people involved in the scene, or at least close observers of the scene, then we should take up the ownership to actually write about it, to tell people about it. And then we should also be the one to retrospectively talk about them and then position them in the way that we want what we are doing to be positioned. So I think it's about taking ownership back, because to me history is a contested ground. Okay, I think those of you from Singapore, you know, recently there's a book published called 700 Years of Singapore History. Okay, how much you believe in that book, that's a different thing. Okay, I always believe that history is always contested. Okay, we know about recently there are a lot of debates about how do we view certain points in history, whether it's in Singapore or other parts of the world. I think we need to take ownership of that. And that's the reason why I'm also very curious about the histories of many so-called ignored scenes. I would say that even in the North, the developed North, there are also ignored scenes. So that's the reason why I think one area that I look into. So I actually brought two books which I'm reading at this point of time, which I think is actually parallel what I think I'm doing, and hopefully more people will come on board. One of this book is actually about the first people of North America. We don't really call them that here, but they are actually the Native Americans. I think recent years, this is the book. It's called Music and Modernity Among First Peoples of North America. Yeah, a very, very beautiful lady. Her name is called Buffy Samory. Amazing lady. You should check her out. She was one of the first Native American singer. And then recently they will have this lady. Her name is called Tanya Tagak. Amazing lady also. Alright, you should check her out also. So I think these are people whom we should actually talk about. And a book like this actually tells us that they are actively doing something like this, which I think is very powerful. Alright, another book that I thought, it actually also tells us a lot about America is that when we talk about America, it's always North America. Okay, how about Latin America? So this book is called Experimentalism in Practice, Music, Perspectives from Latin America. I think this is also another attempt by the Latin American colleagues to gather this with this record label, which I admire quite a lot, called Buh Records, B-U-H, which are actively archiving some of the things that they have done in the past, but also releasing current stuff. So I think this is where I think we should do more to try to position ourselves and to write our own stories. So basically, I encourage anyone here who want to write something, I think you should go out and do it. Okay, but anyway, it goes along with the whole DIY punk spirit. You just pick a pen up. Okay? No, not pick a pen. You can use a handphone, start typing your notes, and then you start uploading into your own Facebook, Instagram, and what have you. I think this is basically just taking back the initiative into our own hands. Yeah.
Thanks, Joseph. I wanted to open it now to the floor a bit, just for a quick discussion. I think we're just around on time. And I just wanted to know also, whether or not, all of you, I think, have traveled for your work. And I'm just wondering about the reception. One of the things, first of all, is when you travel for your work, and the way that a lot of gigs or even academic conferences, we tend to be associated with the country we're from. Right, so we bring along with us almost like this context really. I'm just wondering, how do you approach that in terms of when people ask you about your work, they tend to associate it with the country you're from. How does that affect, or how do you deal with that? And this ties into the fact that, of course, there is it's both it's kind of a bit of a burden, because there are all these preconceived notions, right? Because people attach these ideas about our work just because we come from a particular place. And of course, it'd be great to have forums and then we can explain more about work. But oftentimes we're just cast on stage and we're presenting something and people are really reading it, reading us through all the identifiers that are attached to our name. How do you see, how do you deal with this?
Okay. So, Mesh, if you have a good night, you play a good show, and there are people in the audience, and they get into the music and they like it, and afterwards they come and talk to you and about things that they've seen when they heard the show, or what it made them think of. And sometimes it's really, really cool stuff, like they see like futuristic sand dunes and I don't know, a spaceship running, stuff like that, okay? And that's most of the time, this is the reaction of people who are just coming to hear the music, right? But then there's the other level of the interviews, and so the media kind of thing. And this is when you hear all the strange stuff. And this is also when you start noticing that there is a certain box that you need to be inside it so that it makes sense, and then it becomes a nice title so people can read it, regardless what you're making. So these things can include, and of course, like Egypt especially with what they call the Arab Spring that happened in 2011, there was a lot of interest from Europe too, but in general, but specifically Europe, and there was a lot of money being put in the arts and culture in Egypt to make work and produce work, and in general it was money that concerned itself or was very, feeling this responsibility that you need to have a voice, you have to make something and have a voice, and we care about your freedom of expression. So there's this kind of aspect to things, right? That you go for the interview afterwards, and then the questions is, do you feel that you can express yourself freely in Cairo? Or tell me about the lyrics that you write. What is it about? Is it about the revolution in Egypt? And I tell them it's actually about my mother and something that I saw when I was 3 years old. And then you read the article, and then it says it talks about the revolution, right? So it's also I think. Being more ridiculous about not taking it seriously to begin with, and being even more ridiculous than the question. This is the way I deal with it.
Okay, whatever. Sang, I wanted to ask you actually, how do you deal with maybe stereotypes about Thailand, or maybe even about being LGBTQ, for example, when you're dealing with media, etc.
Yeah, so when I did my work abroad, I think I'm mostly just happy because people would just be like, oh, you're from Thailand. Oh, I went to Bangkok before. So they told their own story, like, oh, I went to Bangkok. I went to Ceylon Side 4. I went to Siam, Sukhui. So they just talk. I don't do the talking. But anyway, but because my work is a lot about gender, so I do all of these different kind of gender stereotypes or characters, but with the Thai culture. So that I do this work that I keep changing my state. Like 5 minutes I'm this like military typical Thai man, and then suddenly I'm this Muay Thai boxer that is transsexual, and then suddenly I'm this Thai beauty queen, and then so usually because people know about Thailand and LGBTQ too, that is so open. Like we have a lot of trans, we have a lot of gays, we have a lot of lesbians. Actually, I mean, there's a lot of them everywhere in the world. It's just more obvious when you go to Thailand because you see lesbians holding hands. It's more because it's open public, so you see it more. But I feel it's the same amount everywhere in the world. It's just that people feel just more because you see more in public in Thailand. So usually, like with me, they will, because they know Thailand is so open about LGBTQ. So when they meet me, they're quite confused actually. When I dress up, usually they're like, "You're so beautiful." And then when they meet me like this, like, "Oh, you're a cute guy." And then when I take off my clothes and do my go-go dancing, like you do in Ceylon, it's like, "Oh, you're so handsome." So it's like, what are you actually like? Are you trans, or are you non-binary, or are you what? Are you so yeah, I just deal with it with the sense of actually happiness. Just very happy to talk with people because since Thailand have that good reputation about like holiday and like people can go there and feel free and yeah.
So Kas, I wanted to ask you, so with GMO and with the kinds of imagery that come out. I mean, I didn't show you guys this picture, but this is the album cover, right? So again, tons of crazy mash of things that are happening there. I'm just wondering about when you present these cultures, or this like what you call from the ghettos, right? Things that are happening in the ghettos, things that are happening in the local communities. When you bring it out into the internet, into the global kind of media, what have you noticed about the reception? What kinds of understandings or misunderstandings have taken place?
Well, firstly, like most of them don't realize that they're so good, this ghetto thing. So we kind of like creating this thing. So it's through our perspective to see this thing and we place it there with our music. And most of the misperspective is like, of course, like, okay, we tried with these two things, like one being Indonesian, second live in Bali. So there's like we so bored when people are like, oh yeah, from Bali, I like gamelan. So it's like and Indonesia, like one they perceive Indonesia as this gonna be like another fascist country, and then suddenly Bali that actually not relate to Indonesia. Sometimes they don't think Bali is Indonesia, and then they say like they love gamelan, and then they just saw us doing like something like this. So I think it's really good that and it's really shocking for them that there is improvisation in some levels that doesn't really relate to them, that I'm sorry to say it, they don't feel superior about it. Because sometimes you talk about this and you have this relationship, oh yeah, like you talk about vibe, let's say, like street culture, and suddenly, yeah, like Davidson is from my hometown, who give a shit, you know? But this thing like really detached from that kind of like, I don't know, like colonization somehow, you know? Because this improvisation going to like really deep, really localized. Like there is one picture that I really like from the page that we have. This is like girls that having like a bite, just how was this? Slow down. This one here? No. This one? No. Yeah, that one, the big one. And this is Ichan posting this, and he found it somewhere, right?
Ichan is
Ichan posting it, and then suddenly, wow, this is so cool. And suddenly, one of my feminist friends, dude, that's the most feminist thing ever from Indonesia. Like, what? Oh, okay. You know what I mean? This is like see, this is like common girls that you can see everywhere,
Right.
across Malaysia, across Indonesia, and suddenly there is this kind of vibe. And this is not our picture,
Yeah.
by the way, this is me. But somehow, like, this is what we also sometimes it's to explain to them. Like, we are really fine, we're okay, actually. Like, the culture is working, like, there is a playful experimentation, stuff like that. And the best thing is start to like really detach with whatever trying to guide them in a way that it's not kind of controlling, like the clubs and what I'm saying before, like the reason why we make this music, because we want to feel home. Like I'm so jealous with African guys that you go to club and then there's a tuk and oh, this is from my hometown, and you don't have that with Asian music. You cannot go to Europe and then you hear some sound and you can dance to it unless the Richie Sakamoto trans edit. But you know what I mean? There is this not. I think Asia
That is gamelan, right?
Ah, shit. but we at least Southeast Asia,
Yeah.
it's really a small number of tracks that make us feel like home. Like not like if you are from Latin America, there's a baile funk, and it's just like yeah. Can you imagine if you're Latin? And it's just like yeah, this is my jam. And then even if it's in Singapore, and Singaporean is like this is their track, you know. So but we don't have it, and that's kind of like one of the problems also why we do this. We need to claim in the absurd way.
Maybe as a bit of a last question to Joseph. Oftentimes in this kind of region or things that we're trying to do in this kind of music, everything gets lumped together under the header of like world music, right? Through what you've been researching on and through what you've been writing, do you think how has the discourse of world music shifted in the last maybe 10, 15 years, especially since you have internet cultures rising? And has there ever been a better term, to rival this world music, because oftentimes world music ends up as whatever is not Euro American.
By the way, world music this term was coined by a group of record company executives back in the 80s to brand the rising population of a lot of African exodus descendants in Europe. But there was a rise in the popularity, so you have music from Nigeria and all these people. I think it is an easy placeholder labeling, but it also betrays the kind of mindset that what do we do, or rather, how do we categorize them? What else can we call them? Do you want to call them by continent? Frankly speaking, that's also very problematic. What is Africa, frankly speaking? I mean, Africa is also, in a way, when we talk about Africa, Egypt is Middle Eastern, but it's also African, it's Islamic. So you have three identities there. So how do you position even African music? So I think labels are always problematic. Even when you talk about jazz, I can tell you many jazz musicians will tell you that they are not jazz musicians, especially back in the 60s. When a lot of the free jazz guys, they will say, no, jazz is a white man term to label us in a certain way that we are entertainers, we are just people in the nightclubs performing and then entertaining the rich and the powerful. So I think any labeling is always problematic. Okay, let's come back to Mark's question about world music. I think global music, I don't know, might be something better, because I think global is a term that is a bit less loaded in a sense, because we talk about globalization, we talk about the impact of cultural flow, idea flow, and then people are influencing one another. I mean, like what Kasim talked about, how cultures from other countries influence them, and then hearing from Amazon, and also Nada talking about how also it's about how do you actually synthesize all these ideas together. So I think in a way maybe we should start to move away from labeling. Okay, how about experimental music? Right? Okay. Experimental world music. Okay. Okay. So what is experimental music? Okay, you ask the wrong people, they can talk to you one whole day, and then they will still hold on to you and try to convince you that experimental music is different from avant-garde music, and so on and so forth. Okay. So humans being humans, we are always being caught in that dilemma of defining, redefining, ad nauseum, basically. So how do we move on from here? I think at the end of the day, I think we need to be open-minded about things. Labels, genres, they're all placeholders. It is a way for us to communicate with one another in a particular setting, in a particular context, so that it's easier for us to communicate. Because if not, how do we start there, right? But I think at the end of the day, we need to be mindful about the fact that it's always along the spectrum. It's never about dichotomy. You right, I wrong, I white, you black, or whatever you want to label things. I think as long as you have that mindset in mind, you label it for that particular context. I think good conversations can be started, and then we can move on from there. But I think at the end of the day, we just need to be very, very cognizant about what we say, and also be clear about when we say certain things. It's perhaps most of the time not definitive. A lot of times it's very, very tentative. But actually, being tentative is very beautiful, because being tentative allows you the room to maneuver and move and think and do music, beautiful music, like our colleagues here who have done last night tonight. So like last night, you ask anyone, so what do you hear last night? Do you call them world music, experimental music? Well, they're just good music. So at the end of the day, I think we just need to have that kind of mindset. Even at academic conferences, I think you can still push that point across. And I think at the end of the day, that's the most important thing about human conversation and discourse. Yeah, I hope I addressed what you have posed.
No, thank you, Joseph. I think that's a very nice way to end off this session as well, because in a way this is also a very tentative attempt to make sense of this. I think in a 1 hour panel and discussing the very complex works of 4 different artists, writers, it's very difficult to really get through all the details, right? But I hope this is at least one way in which you can start to approach your work. I hope I give a bit of introduction also so that you can explore it on your own. I think with that, thank you for your patience and also for coming out in such a great force on a Sunday afternoon after last night. Daughter, son, Nara, and Khan.